Let's dig into some math about it because I think a lot of people are reacting on emotions and they're not really looking at the math of it. So let's start from Canada's GDP. So $3.3 trillion is Canada's GDP approximately. We export approximately $760 billion. That's our total Canadian exports. Hydrocarbon exports are our biggest. I know there's a bunch of people who think that the entire world runs on hydroelectric dams or solar power or something like that, but $230 billion is our total hydrocarbon exports, and that would be oil, natural gas, and refined hydrocarbon products. And 95% of that is sold to the US. So $3.3 trillion is total GDP, 760 billion is total exports, and 230 billion is hydrocarbon exports, 95% of which is sold to the US. For perspective, the number two would be the Canadian auto industry is 80 billion. So hydrocarbon, 230 billion, exports of auto parts and cars is 80 billion. So it's significantly less. So those are the numbers in mind. So when people are having that kind of knee-jerk reaction and think that Canada, U.S. will get all of its oil from Venezuela, and Donald Trump will unilaterally declare that. Okay, now I guess if that did happen, if $230 billion worth of exports disappeared overnight, that is a major event. Like that is a Great Depression type decrease in GDP type, that's the type of thing that's, 6, 7, 8% or something. And that would be, akin to the annual percentage decreases in the Great Depression. But let's walk through what the probability of that is. Okay, so Venezuela does have proven oil reserves of approximately 304 billion barrels of oil. Okay, Canada, that's number one. Number one. Okay, Canada has proven oil reserves of 170 billion, which is, most sources number five. So 304 billion to 170 billion. Now, Venezuela's, problems with their government are one thing, and the difficulty of mining their oil is a different thing. Okay, neither Canada nor Venezuela has the same light sweet crude that a Saudi Arabia would have, for example. Okay, well, let's go through the production because production, reserves are one thing, production is another. Okay, Venezuela's oil production, they produce about 1.1 million barrels of oil per day. Canada, that's number 18 in the world. So they're number one in proven oil reserves, but number 18 in production. Canada, on the other hand, produces 5.5 million barrels of oil per day, which is number five in the world. Venezuela peaked out historically at 3.5 million barrels of oil per day. Okay. Now, you know, Canada, on the other hand, like we're producing 5.5 million. The estimates that Venezuela could increase production, because maybe the thought process is that Venezuela has not just the reserves are one thing, production's another thing, production capacity is a different thing altogether. The estimates are that Venezuela could ramp up production with kind of modest capital expenditures in the next 1 to 3 years to approximately 1.5 million barrels of oil per day. That's what's possible in the next 1 to 3 years with modest increase in capital expenditures, which one would think that is likely to occur. Okay, but even if they do increase that and they hit that target from 1.1 million barrels of oil today to 1.5 million barrels of oil per day, Canada still produces 5.5 million barrels of oil per day. So there's no world where they would be able to produce and replace that 5.5 million barrels of oil per day within basically Trump's tenure. And here's the point where we talk about the Trump derangement syndrome a lot. And Trump doesn't make these decisions. Okay. Trump might have made the call to go get Maduro, but he doesn't tell Chevron who to buy their oil from. He doesn't tell the oil refiners who to buy their oil from. They're going to buy their oil. The cheapest place for them to buy their oil is using the existing infrastructure. Okay. So what we're talking about primarily is where will development for new production come from? And so in the next, 1 to 3 years, we would expect that additional investment would likely go to Venezuela because Venezuela has a couple challenges. Only one of which was the political regime. Venezuela's oil is particularly difficult to mine. Canada's isn't easy to mine either. It's tar sands, it's oil sands. It's not Saudi Arabia crude oil that gets produced for less than $10 a barrel, which is kind of wild when you think about the prices. And it's like that. That's why Saudi Arabia is so rich with oil money because Saudi Aramco is producing oil for less than $10 a barrel and selling it for 50, 60, 70, 80, $100 a barrel, depending on the time and place of when this gets sold. But Venezuela, kind of the crude understanding of it is that more of their proven oil reserves are offshore. They're not actually just heavy oil reserves. And even their heavy oil reserves, their oil sands, if you will, they have different depths and viscosities. So Canada's, when you're mining oil, if it's all one even depth, that's a little bit more cost effective to mine. But when it's varying depths and varying viscosities, it's more expensive to mine. And that's kind of the nature of Venezuelan oil. But on the other hand, Venezuelan workers are cheaper than Canadian workers. So if I'm an oil company and I just look at the political regime, which one is now more friendly? If the U.S. is trying to, recruit their investment, so to speak, from this mission, well, the oil company executives might be thinking that it's going to be the political climate is going to be favorable to oil development, where I think, we've known about the problems in Canada where we see that the oil, producing oil in Canada is very uncertain. Can we get the permits? Can we get the pipelines to get it out? So I think you're going to see new capital expenditures, flow increasingly to Venezuela. That's very, very likely. But Venezuela's ability to replace the 5.5 million barrels of oil per day, when all estimates suggest that the best case scenario is that they could produce 1.5 million barrels per day in the next 1 to 3 years.
Yeah, and that's the big point I think that people need to take away from this is we are not going to be replaced overnight. Like there's no way. It's going to take multiple years. It's going to take billions of dollars worth of investment. And then there has to be the ability for these oil companies who are going to repair, replace, and improve the infrastructure in Venezuela to get their investment back. Like there's a lot of things moving here. But I don't want to kind of glaze over and think, oh, everything's fine, because, for years we have had a major productivity problem in Canada, and we should be having pipelines that are going to both the West Coast and to the East Coast so that it opens up more markets to Canadian oil and gas. What are your thoughts on that? And, where do we go from here?
Yeah, so that's the important part to understand is like, people, trying to let their personal thoughts about Trump kind of control their emotions a little bit. And Trump doesn't decide who oil companies are going to buy their heavy oil from. They're going to buy from whatever makes their shareholders the most money. And their shareholders are going to make the most money by buying by existing proven infrastructure. But you're right. This isn't just a nothing burger. It's the new infrastructure that's going to get invested. It's even less likely now that that's going to get deployed in Canada. And so, in terms of increasing our productivity, I mean, directing our our labor and capital to the highest paying activities, which is tends, has been resource extraction. Since this political regime change, we probably shouldn't expect there's going to be a whole bunch of capital expenditures, and they've been largely throttled back or frozen in some instances since 2015. And that was a combination of the kind of the political environment, and plus just the oil prices around the world tanking, where oil companies decide, I don't want to invest in any new infrastructure, especially in Canada, because the political regime is not entirely favorable. We can invest a bunch of money and maybe never get anything out of the ground, and we're not certain where the prices are going to be. So it's one of the big reasons why we have that GDP per capita issue. Is the other one being that we just don't invest in any capital expenditures, especially in the small businesses that create 53% of the jobs. They kind of have no access to capital. That's a whole other issue. But yeah, it's a very concerning long-term trend. We already were very, very concerned with the lack of capital expenditures because of the political environment, but it actually just got way, way tougher because now one of the other, competitors, and you have to view these companies, these countries as competitors. They're all trying to sell their oil and their resources on international markets. One of them with a whole bunch of proven reserves now would look to be more friendly than Canada in terms of the political environment. They might not have the same geological advantages that Canadian oil has, because again, a lot of Venezuelan oil is a lot of it's offshore and a lot of it's at inconsistent depths, what makes it a little more difficult to mine. But like I said, they have cheaper labor than we do, right? Because it's not all just political regime, right? Because Libya produces more oil than Venezuela. People forget about that. It's not like the Libyan government is this amazing free market machine or anything like that. But they're producing more oil than Venezuela at number 18. But so long term, if we weren't concerned already about lack of capital improvements to increase productivity, we should be now. Short term, like I said, there's just no way practically to replace that 5.5 million barrels of oil per day using Venezuela, because it's going to take time and significant capital investment. And you have to encourage companies to invest that capital, and they just won't invest that capital until they've exhausted the productivity from their current capital investments. It's like, why do I need to invest in new capacity when my current capacity is meeting the market demands? It's like the concern is, where's the new investment coming? And we're already very, very concerned that it just wasn't happening in Canada for a very long time. But now, in terms of the future outlook, it looks like in that respects, the future aspect of additional capital investment, it kind of looks like a death blow.
Yeah, and just because of the political stuff that's been happening in Canada for the past 10 years, that we've had liberals in charge here since Trudeau, and now Carney, who is his puppet master. There has been, we've scared away billions, hundreds of billions of dollars worth of investment in projects in Canada, mostly related to oil and gas, because that is like one of the biggest triggers that we've got in Canada. Other things, that has caused problems is interprovincial trade. So in Canada, we've got problems with BC not wanting a pipeline, and they want to ensure that, the Indigenous tribes are consulted and, get their grift on this whole time. So companies are very hesitant to invest in Canada, because why would you? Why would you want to invest billions of dollars, go through all these environmental, plans and studies and engineering and all of this stuff just to be rejected by the Canadian government? Like, it takes a decade or more to get permits to even start a project here. And that's billions of dollars for a company. So, if we want to see some change in Canada, we're not going to vote our way out of it, but I don't know what the answer is, because the answer is plain as the knows on your face that we need more capital expenditures and investment in Canada, in our resource development, but also in small business development. Like, small businesses need capital to survive. They need capital to grow. They need to invest in machinery, in equipment, in buildings, so that they can, be the entrepreneurs that they are and invent cool stuff that we can sell to the rest of the world, right? So with that in mind, like, let's pack this up and put it into a package that our viewers can, comprehend. It's like, where do Canadians go from here? Because it looks like, from all aspects on the outside, from the political climate at any rate, things aren't looking good currently. But there's got to be hope for the future, at least the near future, and possibly moving forward into 5 years out, 10 years out, to build wealth and potentially find other options. So maybe talk about that a bit.
Yeah. So I mean, the rational expectation is that we're not going to get that capital investment that's going to have that broad-based productivity increase that benefits, the 80% of the population. Like that's not likely. It wasn't likely before the regime change in Venezuela, and now with a likely a more accommodating regime incoming in Venezuela, it's almost certain at this point. So that sort of resource and oil and gas, development to increase our productivity, it's just not on the horizon. Okay. So I mean, and that's probably not something we're going to vote our way out of, and you're not going to take, Crown Royal off the shelves and change that anytime soon. Like that's just not going to happen, because that's not Trump making that decision. It's like I said, it's just oil companies making a decision on what's going to maximize the return for their shareholder. They didn't want to invest in Canada for the last 10, 11 years. They're almost certainly not going to want to do it now. And so where does that leave us? Well, we do know that the current infrastructure is not going to get wasted. The current infrastructure is the most cost-effective way, and you can't replace that 5.5 billion barrels of oil per day by simply capturing a leader. It doesn't, that sort of thing. You can't just turn on the tap, so to speak. The taps that used to exist, the production capacity that used to exist, it's long since deteriorated. It's gone. There is a little bit of unused production capacity that is available, but it's nowhere near enough to replicate Canada. So what does that mean? It's like, our oil and gas current industry is not going away. It's just not likely to grow anytime soon. We're not going to grow our way out of it. So what's going to happen is governments are going to try to spend their way out of it. They're going to print more fake money, and that fake money, through the magic of inflation, is going to seem like it's coming to the masses, but really it's going to end up in the hands of all the asset holders. So when you print money and you distribute it to people, it's like they feel good when they get it, but ultimately they spend it on the assets, at the companies owned by the people who already own all the assets, and a disproportionate amount of that money ends up flowing into assets. And so it's going to result in asset price inflation even more so. Whereas, investments that would, output a lot of high paying jobs, there's no such thing as trickle down economics. It's not like a bunch of poor people get rich off of serving a bunch of rich people. That's not how it works. What increases, productivity and quality of life is when you convince rich people to invest money. And when you convince them to invest money, that creates that high paying job. So it's not that trickle down over time. It's that investment all at once that brings on, thousands of high paying jobs. It's like, that's what actually increases productivity and has broad based increases across the economy. That's not what's going to happen. So governments are going to be even more incentivized to print more fake money, run that deficit from 80 billion to 90 billion to 100 billion to 200 billion. And where ultimately does that capital end up? It ends in asset price appreciation. And so it's going to benefit the people who actually have productive private companies. It's going to end up in real estate, despite the current challenges in Ontario. It's going to end up in high quality stocks that pay dividends. It's going to end up in gold, and it's going to end up in Bitcoin. It's like that's where that capital is going to end up. And so once you know that the government is going to try to spend their way out of it, and they're going to fail trying to spend their way out of it, and all they're going to do is increase asset prices. Now you got to figure out how do I get my hands on that capital? How do I figure out how to borrow that capital efficiently to invest in these assets prudently, that I can be one of the few that take part in the upside?